IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of on-hand cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your Cyber Hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. Do your end users always, and I mean always without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. That's the number 1 password. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2025 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place April 28th to May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC25 and use the promo code 5U5SecWeekly. I'm registered. I'll be there. We hope to see you there as well. All right, gentlemen, we're going to dig into articles. And the first article, we touched on a little bit in the last segment, right? We were talking about cybersecurity responsibilities and DORA and how it impacts the entire C-suite and the board of directors. Here's an article that lays out what are the cybersecurity responsibilities by executive role.
And guess who's missing? The board of directors. Not listed in this. And either is general counsel, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So they listed off the CEO, the CFO, CIO, CISO, CTO, COO, Chief Marketing Officer, and Chief Human Resource Officer. No board, no general counsel. All right.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Counsel really surprises me. It's not surprising they left off the board. I think a lot of people don't think about it that way, but
they should.
Leaving off the GC is like an obvious. How the hell did you do
exactly.
that?
I mean, they should be thinking at the board of directors as executives who manage the company because they do.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just saying it's not surprising they got left off, right?
Right. Yeah, and you start digging through some of the priorities or areas of accountability for each one of these roles, and there are some instances where I found there are some missing items, right? I mean, they covered some high level things, but from a CEO's perspective, I mean, first and foremost, it's not the marketing officer's job about reputation. The CEO is the face of the company. Mm-hmm. When something happens, who's getting in front, right? It's the public relations folks working with the CEO, and the CEO is getting in front of the world. So they missed that. That's a big miss. At the end of it, high level resource allocation, they're the ones navigating who does what goes where, approving funds with the CFO and moving money, moving people, moving partners. That's what they're doing. And guess what else was missing?
There was a lot of
management.
Sure, what was that, Jason?
Risk management.
Risk management, yeah. There was a lot of pieces and parts that were put in here too that I thought were strange that they put under other areas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in a way, so under the CHRO is onboarding and offboarding security. I mean, I guess physically you're responsible for onboarding and offboarding every employee, but the security components of that really fall under the CISO, right? Like cybersecurity training.
Absolutely.
I guess it kind of falls in the training platform, but overall, that's really part of security awareness training, which they even call out as managed by the CISO. And then there are just other things around that just didn't make sense. The incident response coordination, BCP, that's a hit or miss, right? That could be in different teams. It just depends. It was just a weird mix. I mean, I did like that they called out under the CEO culture.
Yeah. Sure.
That should have been in a 48-point font. But like, that's the biggest thing that indicates whether you're going to be successful or not is, does the CEO support the culture and push it down and empower you?
Yeah.
Agreed. And that's why I like the article in that we talked about this, I think last week or the week before. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility across the entire executive team, right? It doesn't all fall onto the CISO. And to have an article come out and talk about all the different roles and responsibilities. Now, they may not have gotten all their responsibilities right, but it's starting to get clearer and clearer that security is not just a CISO issue. It's an executive issue. And how should all the executives be part of owning a portion of this? Because if you just relegate it all to the CISO and then make the CISO the scapegoat, you're never going to get ahead of this. You're just going to be right back where you were before you hired the last CISO.
I say this all the time. No action is still an action. And for decades, we've seen no action when it comes to this. It's great to finally see some action. What this article did was it spawned a conversation that we're having on how do we make this better? How do we mature this? How do we carry this forward, right? It's beautiful. I'm so glad this article is out there. Now it's up to us as folks in the industry to help refine this conversation.
The thing that I like about this article is it now gives you an action item, right? The thing every CISO should do, if you haven't already done it, is go now have a conversation with the CEO and say, can we have a discussion about roles and responsibilities? What's the RACI look like for the C-level staff? How do we get agreement on that, right? Like, so it's fine. Like, if you're the CFO and you don't think you're responsible for managing cyber insurance, let's identify that. So it's not like a drop ball that nobody's handling. And if the CISO thinks he is and the CFO thinks he is, let's not both fight over that ball while it's in the air, right? Let's make sure we have good alignment. Everybody's in agreement. And then, when something's out of alignment 9 months from now, you can go back to that RACI and say, wait a minute, we agreed on this. Like,
exactly.
You're not adhering to this, right? Even to the CEO, you can go, you're not handling culture appropriately. You're not empowering me to get the stuff that I need done. And I think that honest conversation among equals, once you've identified the roles and responsibilities, is really how you foment a really great program.
Absolutely.
What I would...
Pro tip on this, though, every single one of these executives has risk management in one way, shape, or form under their responsibility.
Oh, you know what I'd use this for? If I were interviewing for a CISO position, I would use this as a blueprint to talk about the roles and responsibilities with each of these people that is part of the interview process.
That's right. Yeah.
I would.
And when you push back and like either there's a misalignment on reporting structure, or you have the discussion about, hey, like, salary isn't where I thought it is. Well, here's why. Because like, this is the work I'm going to have to put in. Yeah. This is the misalignment the org has. Here's how I see it. And if at the end of the day, if they're like, that's not what we're thinking, that's a better outcome for you, because you should know that this isn't what you signed up for ahead of time, right? Versus 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And you're like, I'm really dissatisfied, right? Like, this isn't working out.
Right. Here's the thing though, too, right? Every organization is its own fingerprint. And there may be some organizations who take one of these responsibilities and put it under a different executive, right? I mean, we just talked about it. The CEO may be falling down in some areas, but they may be so busy that they're going to have to delegate it off. And as long as the expectation is out there, there's agreement across the executive team, the board of directors knows who's responsible for what, that's okay. You can be your own thing.
What are the pros and cons of that decision, right? Exactly. And what are the business outcomes that get driven differently because of that, right? There are trade-offs in anything. Like, we are about making informed risk decisions, right? That's the same thing. You're just identifying, okay, if that's the case, if we're not going to have this, here is what the expected outcome is going to look like. Let's all agree to that ahead of time.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's a great discussion article.
It's a great blueprint. Mm-hmm. It will morph and change for every organization, but I just thought it was a really good blueprint for CISOs to have conversations with their executive peers on, are you responsible for these? Am I responsible for this? Like, get that alignment, especially during the interview process. Because the last thing you want to do is walk in there and then everything just rolls downhill.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you're already in the role, it's a great opening for a discussion, right? Like, send it to the CHRO and be like, hey, I saw this article. Like, what do you think about this? Do you align? Is there some differences? Can we go have a lunch? Can we talk through, like, it just foments, I think, which is one of the best things as a CISO you need to learn how to do: conversation and communication.
Oh, yeah.
Build relationships.
Thus, this segment,
folks. Best of the segment. Article number 2.
Be humble. You should be humble.
Humble leaders inspire others to step up. I might have a problem with that one. Anyways, no, just joking.
Understand where you need to grow, Matt. That's part of the session.
That's part of this segment also. Like I sometimes it forces me to look in the mirror.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to say about this article, because, I talk about it all the time, is that servant leadership.
Yep.
And with that comes the ability to be humble. You have to be, right, at the end of the day. And it works. Now, like anything, there's a balance, right? Because you don't want to be that humble leader that continuously gets stepped on and taken advantage of either. So there's a balance that you have to have. But at the end of the day, it truly does help with getting a great culture, getting teamwork built, building trust, making sure that there's empathy and you're caring about the employees who work on your team, right? It shows that, but it takes work. You have to be very self-aware, right? You have to be building that culture constantly. Communication is essential in all of that.
And everybody's not the same, right? Like,
exactly.
Matt, you called it out front, like, maybe you're not so humble, right? Like I know this is not something I necessarily gravitate towards, right? But you have to understand why it's something you might want to strive towards. What are the benefits, right? What are the things to watch out for? Don't get walked on. But like, it's understanding like where someone else's strengths are and where to hire for your team, right? Maybe if you're not the most humble person, hire a deputy who's humble, who then you can use to create alignment with other people, right? So I think that's the thing. Like, it's not a cookie cutter thing to say, if you're not humble, you're not going to be successful. It's to say, like, understand what the pros and cons are, what the benefits and features are of being able to look at that and say, hey, look, I need to grow in this area, or I need to understand where my failure points are and how to overcome those in other ways, right? And then be the best authentic self that you can be.
Exactly. And I think that's part of it, right? Is authenticity, transparency to build that trust. Now, humility plays a role there, but again, it's a balanced role. We don't know everything, right? And at times as leaders, we make mistakes. We have to acknowledge those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and hopefully everybody learns and steps up. That is a level of humble leadership, right? But it's being aware that you did make a mistake and that your team, will benefit from the acknowledgement, because that's creating a trust with your team to step up. So that's why I like this article, because I think the research was done some of the initial research was done in China. And I could see that that society is different than ours, right? So being humble there is different than here, right? Like the culture are very, very different.
Well, I mean, you understand that cultural interplay, right? If you're working always with people in the US, and then you all of a sudden are working with outsourced providers in India, like, that cultural change and difference is stark, right? Not in a bad way. It's just stark. It's different, right? If you're working with people in Australia, it's different. If you're working with people in Finland, it's different. Like, understand that and how you have to align and understand those differences in culture to better the operations that you're pulling forward.
Working with difficult people. Oh, that's another one. I got to look in the mirror.
Now, this article was initially titled "Working with CISOs," but they changed it at the last minute.
I like how the article started off and said, here are some of the traits around, folks that you may see as difficult. And the bullets are, at a high level, they have a different viewpoint than yours, right? They're usually really good at what they do. They can, convince people, be seen as inflexible. They have different priorities than you have. They may just be different personalities than yours. Well, what does that tell you? Are they difficult people? Or maybe your perspectives don't align. Right. So, I mean, that's that's one of the biggest takeaways in this article for me, is that, hey, listen, you live in your own world, you have your own perspective, right? And that other person that you may see as difficult may just have a different perspective than yours, may have a
Right.
different working style than yours, right? May have a different leadership style than yours. So take it
Yeah,
for what
and
it's worth, right?
I went right to the tips. Like, there's one tip on here that I have found like has paid dividends for me, right? Especially later as I have matured in my career. Number 4, assume the best intentions.
I have that highlighted, Ben. I
Right.
highlighted that in the list.
Like if you go into the
Absolutely.
conversation, like take the rest of these tips and like, yeah, they're fine. But for me, if you bring one, it's assume the best intentions, because exactly
Yep.
what you highlighted earlier, Jason, like different communication style, just different way of doing business. Like you assume going into that conversation, coming out of it, like, man, that guy is just a jerk and he's being like, you're never going to come away with a
Never.
perspective. And everybody is leading their own life and their own experiences.
Right.
Geez, like we don't know what's going on. And like somebody, is their wife going through a treatment with cancer? Did their kid just have some incident at school? Like,
Yep.
you don't know what they're
Right.
bringing to that. And as a result, you really could misperceive what's going on. And if you bring that, I think grace is another word for it. If you bring that to the discussion and say, hey, like I misperceived this, maybe, how can we work on it? I think that gets you a really, really long way to kind of then taking the rest of these tips and applying.
The second you walk in the door and you're having a conversation based on a defensive posture, the first thing you're doing is you're putting that person across from you on their heels. You're backing them into a corner. And what does a dog do when you back them in the corner? They try to fight their way out, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's the last thing you want to be doing. You don't want to be putting people on their heels. You don't want to be backing people into corners because they're just going to try to fight their way out.
Yep. I also try to not take things personally, especially in a lot of decisions you have to make as a leader in the workforce. That's another one that you just have to realize sometimes it's just about business and you got to put the personal stuff aside. So yeah, some good tips in here and a lot of really good scenarios. So if anybody's struggling with this, there's some really good scenarios that the author walks through to talk through like how to address them, which I thought was helpful.
Yeah, I talk about it on the show, having that personal board of directors, and one of them is talk it over with a trusted buddy. Well, guess what that is? You have your personal board of directors that if you're struggling, go bounce it off some folks that you trust and get some ideas on how you can work through it.
Yep.
Matt, you mentioned one thing, which I just want to call it. I think it's super important is this whole, like, don't take it personally thing. Right. And I actually saw something over the weekend that was really kind of an epiphany for me. A lot of people, I think for our age, like we grew up in this thing where like you went to work and there was this mantra of like, it's a family. We're going to treat you like a family. Right. Like, and everybody was always upset because the riff would happen or something would go on. And you're like, I'm not being treated like a family. And I saw a corporate leader, he was talking, he said, we don't say we treat each other like a family. We say we treat each other like a professional sports team. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the talent. And if you're not performing, like, and that's a good way. Like a sports team is like, it's a job. It's about the performance. Like, I understand that better. And so I think if we get into that mentality and mindset, it's a lot better than the way I always heard it was like, we're a family at work. Like, we're not a family. Like, we're going to get a job.
Yeah. I mean, look, back when our parents were working, it was more like a family. Now it is more like a sports team, right? Like, you're trading pieces and parts all the time. You're hiring new executive, people are leaving. Like, I think that's a really good analogy, Ben, when you think about it. Because if you look at what's getting ready to happen on the NFL draft side, you're going to see a lot of horse trading going on, a lot of moves
I brought
to
it
get
back
ready.
For you and Jason, I brought it back.
That was awesome.
It's funny that you bring that up, Ben, because our CEO says that a lot as well. He said it, and he's like, "Listen, you don't get to choose your family."
Yeah.
Have you seen just how crazy some families are?
Mm-hmm.
The dysfunction that happens within family here, we choose to be with each other and choose to collaborate with each other and choose to do great things together. Right. So that's the difference, and dead on, 100% dead on.
And sometimes free agency is really good.
Yeah,
it is. Sometimes it is. It's part of the marketplace. The signs of motivating people when they need it. Through praise.
I really love the delivering praise through stories. I think it's super impactful. I love it. And I read through the part about Richard Branson and how he would carry a notebook around with him just to be able to write down the experiences that he had with people so he could remember the story, so he could infuse it into the power of praise and the stories behind it, and just really being intentional behind it. I think that's super impressive.
I think it's a really interesting skill set for a leader to have, is to use stories as a way to build that trust and kind of communication with your staff, right? Stories have a lot of power. And I think the best leaders are also the best storytellers.
Agreed.
And this is why.
100%. Plain and simple. Yep.
Let's see. Effective communication in the workplace. Lesson number 1. Listening is more important than speaking. It's not as important. I think it's probably more important. Sometimes, why did God give you 2 ears and 1 mouth?
More important. It's way more important. I mean, we've all been in meetings with these type of folks who walk in the meeting, sit down, pop out their laptop or their cell phone, and they're like my 13-year-old on Snapchat, completely just engulfed in their device. And they're not paying attention. They're not listening. They're not being a part of the conversation. And it's annoying. And it's to me, it's semi disrespectful to the rest of the folks in those meetings. You know, it's your communication isn't just your verbal communication. It's your body language. It's you paying attention. It's showing that you're listening. It's showing active listening, right? You know, if you have someone who's pretty much
it's more than just hearing.
Yes, exactly.
It's more than just hearing, right? Like, so many people go in and they hear what's being said, but they're not really listening. They're not like understanding, taking it in, like going back to assume the best intentions. If you go into a meeting and like you have assumptions about it, you're not really hearing what's going on. You're there, and then you speak. You still haven't listened, right? Listen, take it in, try to understand it, take a pregnant pause moment before you speak, right? And then give other people the opportunity to have that conversation with you, right?
Yeah. I mean, number 1, take your device and move it. Take your device, put it in your pocket, put it in your backpack, fold up your laptop. If you need to take some notes, cool, but you're not sitting there eyeballing the laptop the entire meeting. You know what I mean? It's just,
so we should treat meetings like they're always in a skiff, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Look, I still carry a composition notebook. I still take handwritten notes. And partly is because I don't want to be distracted on the computer, right? I want to pay attention. If I'm listening, you'll see me writing because I'm taking down notes. That's how I know what's going on, right? And if you are on your phone or on your computer, that nonverbal communication does speak volumes because you're not paying attention, right? So that's why I still use the old paper trick, guys. And my wife hates all these composition notebooks that I have, but it is how I take notes. It's how I pay attention. It's how I know what, next steps or action items or whatever it is that I need from that meeting. I have those. I have them with me.
There's nothing more that says I don't give 2 craps about what you're saying than sitting there, eyeballs glued to a device the entire meeting.
Yeah.
That just, you may be able to say, I heard what you said, but at the end of the day, you really don't care.
You didn't.
You care more about what's going on that laptop.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I notice when I'm like, another thing, conversation like in the car while you're driving, you're not really paying attention because half of your brain is thinking about the road, the traffic, everything else. You don't absorb the same, right? There's like these moments where if you're not 100% focused on it, you're not going to retain everything, whether it's looking at your computer or driving while you're on a meeting. Like the amount of information that you retain is limited.
Yeah. And been there, done that. We all have. We've all had to take calls or meetings on the road. But if there's something that's worth a deeper conversation or something that warrants listening, you say to the folks on that meeting, listen, I want to take a sidebar. I want to put this aside. I want to be able to get a meeting on the calendar so we can focus on this.
Yep.
Right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. Instead of half paying attention, not putting focus toward it, and then ultimately either losing action items or not remembering to do something that you're supposed to do. And that just erodes trust right there. So it's worth having the conversation of, right, let's table that and let's get a meeting where we can all focus on this.
Yeah. Agreed. Last article, when I first saw the title, How to Structure a Great Interview, I was just thinking, just watch the podcast. But
That's
they
right.
meant like a job interview, so it's,
Right. No, this is, I mean, honestly, this is a really good guide, right? I mean, at the end of the day, clarity is on the organization to make sure that they're putting that forward. So that way the expectation, and we're not good at it. Believe me, we talk about that gap between HR and cybersecurity all the time.
yeah.
But it's up to us to try to fill that gap. And this is a great structure, right? Making sure there's clarity on the roles and the responsibilities, making sure that there's a really good structure to the way the interview goes. I've always been a fan of don't go right in heavy-handed out of the gate with interview questions. Have some softening interview questions,
Yeah,
right?
I
That
need
really
some icebreakers.
gets the person comfortable speaking, right? Because they're coming in the door nervous. Of course they are. So you want to be able to kind of slide them into a little bit of comfortability. So that way it's a good experience for them as well.
Yeah. One of the things in this article, like it seemed to be focused on, the one-on-one interview, right? And I'm all for that, right? But I think one of the things I would add on to this is when I'm interviewing somebody, I'm not interviewing them with the hardcore technical questions, right? Because somebody on my team or, a part of the interview panel has already done that.
Right.
I like to have like specific goals and tasks for different people on the interview. Like I know that there are some people like they're going to suss out just because of the way they're wired and the way they work on the team, whether they're going to connect with the rest of the team. I know other people are going to be able to suss out, is this person technically fit for the roles and responsibility?
Right.
I think aligning that way, instead of having everybody ask, like, there's 20 questions. If you could all please ask the 20 questions and assess whether they answer them correctly. Like, that's not valuable.
No.
Focus on is this person going to work, one, in the role, but more importantly, with the team, and focus people's strengths, again, on those interview areas, just like you do in their job roles.
Yeah, that's a big piece of the behavioral questions, right? Making sure they have that adaptability, the teamwork, their perspective on culture fits your culture.
Yeah. I focus more on the communication, soft skills, written skills, technical skills. My engineering team, that's what they're for, right? They can go test them on their tech skills, but I want to make sure they have good communication skills. They have those other soft skills that I'm looking for, and then let somebody else assess the technical requirements for that. And if you're in the position to be interviewed and you're a CISO, I go back to the first article and use that as my blueprint on all the questions I would ask in that last section, where give them time to ask their questions. That's where I would be focused.
Yeah. The last
I think a really good highlight point is like the other thing I like to do in an interview is I like to figure out what they're going to ask me. Like what the questioning, right? Teeing it up to find out like what they're asking and what they're inquisitive about tells me a lot about how well they're going to function in the role, right? And I think to your point, Matt, like if you're a CISO and you're interviewing, like, and you go in with a thoughtful approach to like, I'm really interested in how you see the CISO role, like where the alignment is. Like if you're asking those deep, thoughtful questions, geez, you're going to do so much better in that interview than if you just go in and be like, what are the benefits like?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, to your point, Ben, that last bullet, I was going to say that last bullet is super important for both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
And it's keep some time for what they may not have said. And that for me is open forum, questions, concerns, whatever the case may be. And I've been in interviews myself where I've asked for that because it wasn't part of their interview structure. Right. I said, do you mind if I take a few minutes to ask you some questions? Yeah. I've done that. Absolutely. And you want to know what? The level of respect that came out of that was amazing, because you want to be able to ensure that you have all your questions, concerns, and expectations met. So don't hesitate to say, do you mind if
the answer to that is no, we don't have time for that.
One.
Red flag.
Run.
Red flag. Red flag. Run very fast. Because the interview is bi-directional.
Yeah.
You're interviewing a candidate and a candidate is interviewing you. Right? It has to be both ways.
It should be happening.
The way it should be happening. Absolutely. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. I love the bi-directional conversation because that's what we do here. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Of course you do. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.